let's kick off the next, also the last session, and not the least best. Actually, it's really wonderful session to end this week's conference. I'm very pleased to be able to invite 4 of our industry and community members to come on board to talk about Web3 and the Chinese digital diaspora. So I'll just say a very quick word to introduce the theme, and then I'll pass on to our guest speakers, the 4 panelists, and we have also very delighted to be able to invite 3 actually, discussants, 1 online. Deb will introduce them in a minute. All right. So we all know the internet is poised to transition into the next era, the era of Web3, which triggers a new round of information revolution and a social cultural transformation. Since 1994, Chinese internet has gone through Web 1 and Web 2. Now, in those times, they were lagging behind. The US led West, but now they're gaining global leader supremacy in mobile communication, social networking, e-commerce, and more. Web3 technologies give China new opportunities in its race for technological supremacy, global influence, and strategic capabilities. They involve a wide array of state and private actors to participate in the development and application of Web3 technologies. But Web3 ecosystem is said to be compatible with the real estate industry, as James vividly described to me when I talked to him during the Christmas. And it was like, Web3 ecosystem is like a real estate industry. It comprises infrastructure and hardware or tools, builders such as IT geeks and programmers, developers, investors, marketers and influencers, buyers, speculators, etc. I really like that metaphor. It has powered the private sector and encouraged new digital entrepreneurship among a new generation of technology geniuses and enthusiasts. How do you view Web3? What do they do? What do people do to figure out how to be active participants rather than passive spectators in the Web3 universe? What have they learned or relearned about their roles and identities in Web3, and in the world? So as I said today, I'm very pleased to be able to invite these 4 representatives of the Chinese community members in Melbourne and Sydney, respectively, Shawn, Casey, Jenks, and James. Thank you for coming to RMIT for this special public seminar for the International Conference on Automated Decision-Making and the Chinese Societies. And there's a lot to talk about Web3 or Chinese Web3 or Web3 in China. But this webinar focuses on their diaspora experience, being Chinese, migrant, and being in the world. So first of all, would you please briefly introduce yourself? We'll start with Jenks.
Okay. Yeah, cool. My name is Jenks. I'm overseas Chinese. I was born in Shanxi and raised in Nanjing. So if I see anyone from northern China, I tell them I'm from Shanxi. If it's from south, meeting someone from the south, I tell them the other one. I have been in Web3 industry for almost 1 year, and I have a very interesting job. I think it's very interesting. It's called developer advocacy. So developer advocacy is a practice to engage and nurture a technical community for a company, project, or for a platform. So it's using technical explanation of things, creating content, and speaking engagements and consulting different kind of builders to be able to sell the product without kind of officially marketing it or selling it to the crowd. So on what a day-to-day looks like is I create contents, I make videos, I go to conferences to talk, and I mentor developers on hackathons and mentor entrepreneurs for accelerator boot camps, for example. So those are my day-to-day job. How I got involved in Web3 was actually in 2019. It was under influence of a friend and a colleague of mine. He was doing Ethereum mining. So back then there was a shortage on GPUs. It was getting very expensive. So I looked into that, and we calculated that in 5 months, if we just buy those expensive GPUs and start mining process, we'll be able to get the profit back, but we get the cost back in about 5 months and start to make profit. So I did that, and it did work. But after that, at some point, I think I had about 8 GPUs running. I thought it was a hobby, but also a way to keep my room warm through the winter. So it was a very expensive heater for me. I didn't care about the cost. So energy consumption was also justified. So I'm not wasting energy. At least I'm keeping my legs warm without turning the heaters on. So that's how I got involved. And then I worked for a company called Linktree. They build microsites for influencers. There's about 30 million users on it now. And the CEO was really pro Web3 at the time. And I initiated a project to integrate Linktree with Ethereum through MetaMask integration. And that project ended up building a verified NFT background and verified NFT profile feature at the end. So that kind of bridged the Linktree, this Web2 product into Web3 world, and they have a foot in the door in that. So that made me got very interested in this industry, and that's when FileCoin started to reach out to me and say, hey, do you want to do DevRel in FileCoin project? I looked into it. What attracted me was the mission of FileCoin, and also the really amazing technology behind that supports the project. So yeah, so I've been working there since May last year.
Great. Shawn?
I'm Shawn, and since 2018, I work as contributor in Common Stack. It's DAO based in Europe and focus on public fund funding. At that time, I'm really interested in how open source software community to raise funds to get money. And yeah, in Common Stack, that's my first time know digital nomad, because the core team of Common Stack, they moved from US to Europe to Switzerland. So I have the idea for the digital nomad at that time. Since 2020, I started to translate and introduce DAO to Chinese community. For example, how to work in DAO and what's the vibe in different DAO, how to contribute. At the same time, I work as contributor in Mirror DAO. Mirror is the most popular publishing platform in Web3. In Web3, we don't use media, we don't use Substack, we all use Mirror. I did creation in Mirror. At that time, I connect with lots of community from Chinese digital nomad, from US, from Europe, from Southeast Asia. Early last year, I work as contributor in SeeDAO. SeeDAO is the biggest impact DAO in Chinese community. Our mission is to connect 1 million digital nomad. In this stage, SeeDAO is doing 2 major things. The first thing is Web3 education for digital nomad. We have our own online learning platform we call Discussants. We have more than 200 courses to study. And the second thing is to develop DAO infrastructure, because we want to reduce the governance cost. We want to increase the efficiency, and all these issues need to support by DAO tool. That's my experience in DAO and Web3. Before I involved in Web3, I'm the founder of one AI startup company for artificial intelligence, and I'm a software engineer and investor. That's all. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Casey.
So my name is Casey.
Yeah, it's okay.
It works now. Okay, I'll just. So my name is Casey. I'm a venture analyst and product manager in Web3. And I got into this industry 2.5 years ago, in the midst of DeFi summer, which is like mid 2020. And the reason I got into it was because I was trapped in China for going back home, like first time in 10 years to celebrate Chinese New Year. And then basically the whole country locked down. And then I kind of like switched my career path from an ordinary product manager into Web3 because I was really fascinated by, we call that crypto at the time, not the Web3 narrative yet. So crypto to me at the time is more like on-chain casino. So got like millions of new projects coming out that reflecting how humans behave on-chain with public data and reflects in real time. So I was like I was really fascinated by this and decided to go in this industry to observe more. So that was the first, my first job was a product lead in an NFT trading platform in the end of 2020. And then we actually opened an art show, like the first ever in real life art show in Beijing, and also in the world. And then after that, I joined the company that later started SeeDAO. And then I started to run as a DAO operator and then design like the product infrastructure for how to run a DAO. And after, so Shawn actually like introduced SeeDAO a little bit. We are one of the largest Chinese speaker DAO operating around the globe. And that's how Shawn and I met through SeeDAO. And then right now we are also involved in one of the projects called Discussants, which is the educational components of SeeDAO to onboard more people into Web3, like mainly focus on, like currently still mainly focus on Chinese speaker. And besides Discussants, I'm also working as a VC analyst based in Sydney at this moment. So that would be me.
Hi, my name is James. I studied animation and interactive media here in MIT 10 years ago. Yeah, before I entered Web3, I was doing design and marketing for a real estate company here in Melbourne. And during the pandemic in 2020, I was working from home and got some new news about the crypto, and I was moved by my friend who was mining the Ethereum, like Jenks, but not him. Yeah, I set up my own mining machine at home as hobby, and then more get into the crypto and the Web3 space. And in the May of 2021, I was lucky to onboard Bored Ape Yacht Club, which is a famous ape monkey picture at the time. Yeah, and then I was in more and more into the NFT space from then, and then I trade NFT like buy and selling pictures online, and until this year I enter and participate different DAOs, and then I realized selling picture is not the future, and then yeah, and then I realized I have to learn something, and then I participate like SeeDAO to do the research, and yeah, and so on. Yeah, that's it. That's me.
Well, thanks for the brief introduction of yourselves. Dave, can we put Dave on the screen, and Kaitlin as well? Hey, Dave.
Hello, hi Haiqing, hi everyone.
So then would you take over and introduce our discussants?
Sure. So I think we'll introduce Kaitlin first, since she's online, and then move to Ellie. I know Kaitlin works with FileCoin, but I'll let Kaitlin give her a short introduction as well.
Yeah, thanks, Dev. Can you hear me okay? My internet's a little unstable. Great. Yeah, it's an honor to be here. I'm colleagues with Jenks. We both work for the FileCoin Foundation. And very, very briefly, my background is actually in policy. So in the early 2000 teens, I was working for the US and UK governments in policy innovation for democracies. And this was actually my first introduction to blockchain as a technology. So I mined some Bitcoin very early on, which I ended up selling at a very bad time, but was really, really taken with these technologies as a solution for the public sector. I ended up going to grad school in Munich, really focused specifically on digital infrastructure and technology governance. And I now lead protocol governance for FileCoin and also jointly with IPFS, if anyone's familiar with the interplanetary file system. What this means is because these are open source protocols, we effectively have to do all of our project and product management out in the open. So all of the thousands and thousands of token holders, miners or storage providers, community members of all different types who participate in this network, they are equal owners of the network as well. And it's my job to design consensus systems to help us make decisions about what we're going to do, both from a technological point of view, but also from an ecosystem and sort of social perspective as well. So happy to be discussing and to hopefully add a little bit to the conversation, particularly since FileCoin has a really large and robust Chinese community. And the way that we work together is a pretty large facet of sort of my day-to-day for the last 2 years.
Thanks, Kaitlin. Yeah, FileCoin is a really, I think, impressive, one of the impressive projects in Web3, and keen to dive further into the China element as well. Great. Next, we'll have Ellie, who is definitely the queen of Web3 over at ADM+S. And Ellie, I'll yield the floor to you.
Yeah, hi. I'm a professor here at RMIT University, working in ADM+S and the Digital Ethnography Research Center and the Blockchain Innovation Hub. And my fellowship project is looking at the social outcomes of blockchain technology, using mostly ethnographic methods, but collaborating with some others who do more on the systems design or data science side of things. And yeah, my case studies are very broad ranging. I have delved into FileCoin a little bit, although haven't gone so far as to write that up in a way other than kind of boring report type situation. But I'm really looking forward to this panel, because I think that some of the cultural dimensions of what's going on inside these very global distributed infrastructures is a puzzle to many at the moment, and we kind of assume that these automated systems are kind of applying the same way everywhere, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. So I'm extremely curious to hear about the experiences of those on this panel.
Thanks, Ellie. And our third discussant is Nicolas Loubert.
Hello. This is my first time on a Web3 or cryptocurrency panel, so I'm really excited about it. I'm quite new to this field, actually. So my current research project has been looking at small-scale gold mining, so Chinese migration to Ghana for small-scale gold mining, and then I had the brilliant idea, I think it's a brilliant idea, to expand that into cryptocurrency mining too, as you know, the whole language around Bitcoin especially is as digital gold. So that threw me into this world almost 2 years ago now, I would say, and it's been an interesting ride, I've got to say, trying to wrap my head around all of this. So I'm really interested in looking at migration, Chinese migration for Bitcoin mining in particular, looking at North America, Sweden. I'm an associate professor at Lund University in Sweden. And just the kind of ways in which material moves, people move, ideas move, all associated around this idea of extracting something that's virtual from the material. So I'm just really interested to hear about the projects that you're all involved in, and I hope I can come up with some interesting questions to prompt you in other directions as well as we have this conversation.
Well, thanks for the self-introduction. Really rich backgrounds in which each one of you. All right, we'll kick off this discussion and response now. Okay, I'll have a first set of questions about the Web3 ecosystem with Chinese characteristics. As Ellie pointed out, you know, you talk about Web3, are they all the same? No, not necessarily, but how? All right, now I'm going to just read out the first one, and you know, we'll just, because of time limit, I'm not going to get all of you to answer all the questions. So for the first one, the question was through to Shawn and Casey. So now, China's Web3 ecosystem favors central control while leveraging decentralized technologies. Like the previous eras, Web3 industries benefit from government support and incentives, while at the same time being contained by the Great Firewall 3.0. How do you understand such a categorization of China's Web3 industries? In other words, is China's Web3 ecosystem different from the rest of the world, and how? Shawn.
Okay,
Yes, please.
I can tell one story. Last August, more than 20 Web3 team, project team, they come together in Dali, a beautiful small city in south of China. And they come to say goodbye to old friends because all this team will go overseas. And one of my friends asked my question because she has 3 years plan to make a documentary, to record video, to do interview for all the Web3 history, Web3 industry. And she asked me a question, how can I go ahead with my plan? Because you all go overseas. My suggestion is, you know, follow this team. You go overseas too, to record how they're struggling overseas and how they achieve overseas. And yeah, that's the future of the Chinese Web3. Yeah, the question is, in China, I think we have two Web3 and separate the Web3 in China, Web3 in all of the world. I think it's separate because in China, they ask for the Web3 based on private blockchain. But in the world, we all think the Web3 should be based on the public blockchain. I think it's separate. That's why lots of the Web3 project, the team have to leave China, I think last year. Yeah, that's what I think.
Do you have anything to add, Casey?
Well, I feel like the definition of Web3 in China, it's fuzzy, as in a lot of like the definition basically got redefined in, let's say, like, I wouldn't say in China, but like in the media, like the way Chinese portrayed certain terms got a bit like ambiguous in China after a while because it has to like comply with certain policy. And in this case, if Web3 has a definition of being open, being permissionless, that wouldn't be the definition in China. They kind of like diverted a bit into a new internet, but without telling you what the new internet is supposed to be, so that they can have some sort of definition of metaverse interject into it. So if you're talking about like China's Web3 ecosystem, It doesn't really have to be public blockchain, as Shawn just mentioned. It just have to be some new data solution that, well, I don't know, different from the second generation. It doesn't have to be token. It doesn't have to be public or transferable or ownership. It doesn't have to be this thing. It just have to be different. So that's just my point of view.
Jenks, do you have anything to add? Or not?
So, yeah. So I want to touch on Casey's point on definition of Web3 is a little bit ambiguous. Yes, it is weird when people talk about Web3 and stuff in China right now, because you can't talk about token, you can't talk about investment, speculation is banned, and then you can't talk about mining. And that was one of the things that impacted FileCoin project a lot, because overnight the mining process was deemed illegal in China. So when people talk about Web3, technology, people only talk about blockchain technology, and people only talk about distributed computing and anything else but the token itself. So definitely is a weird spot right now. Yeah.
You touched upon the tokenless metaverse.
Tokenless metaverse. So one of the things I was looking at your question, and then before we got a list of it, I was looking at it. Actually, metaverse in my mind doesn't have to be tokenized, right? It doesn't have to be doesn't have to run on blockchain, or doesn't have to run on crypto. But because the attribute is quite similar to a lot of blockchain projects, so it gets mentioned together. I think it's completely fine to do metaverse without token, just less cool probably, and less kind of like the ownership is less distributed to the members of the community and less equally divided. But you can still have amazing metaverse projects. And China is advancing there, but because all the other things are missing, like the exciting parts are missing, so there is a big exodus of talent outside to go out of China right now.
Yeah, as Shawn also mentioned, it's about overseas, going overseas,
Yes,
going over.
usually all these teams will go to the Southeast Asia, just because they want to add the tokenomic in their project, in their product, and it's banned in China, and they have no idea how to do without the tokenomic for some project. So this kind of project, the only choice for them is move overseas.
Well, James, you are in a very privileged position that because you're already overseas, you didn't experience any of those restrictions. So from your experience, how do Chinese developers and players, you are one of the players, get around the restrictions to participate in the international market?
As far as I know, there are still lots of trader, investor in China mainland doing like Bitcoin and also other coin token trading. But they got their special way, like not a public way to do that, as no as a VPN or over the wall called Fanchang.
Scale the wall.
Yeah, scale the wall. Yeah. There are still got like lots of people doing that, as I know. Yeah, but as we communicate, we share experience on WeChat, but most of time just we communicate by our own like code name, not exactly like token, because token itself cannot be like discussed publicly in China. But yeah, we will use like code name. But yeah, as far as I know, there are still got lots of way to do like to trade like in the international public market. Yeah.
So you have developed your own language, Haihua.
Yes.
In crypto industry.
Yeah. We might use some like symbol or other stuff, or yeah. like other than the Chinese itself.
I want a glossary.
I heard there's a lot of nicknames for President Xi inside of like all the digital platforms in China.
Something like that.
Because you can't mention the name directly.
Yeah.
You'll get banned
Or
very
just say
quickly.
Baltimore.
Yeah.
Or
And
the
then
one
there's
that
a
will be
list of
banned.
really weird references to President Xi, and they get blocked. So a lot of people like they're just talking about random things like fruits and doing things, and then they get banned. Like messages just disappear out of thin air. They were not even referencing to those things, but it gets censored somehow. Yeah. There is so just as like Chinese government sort of turn censorship into a state of art thing, and the people in China subconsciously has a mechanism to deal with it, and it's a kind of a struggle between the two right now. I think that sort of applies to crypto and development of Web3 too.
Dave, he wants to ask a question. You can use your privilege of being co-chair to do so.
Thanks. Yeah, I think the question of censorship and Web3 in the mainland is of course super interesting. And we've also seen cases where people have used the blockchain to actually share information and actually put them on smart contracts during protests. I think even earlier this year, the white paper movement in March coming out of Beijing and Shanghai and other places. I think moving the discussion then towards governance, which I think is one of the most important questions. I think that conversation is happening now outside Web3 as well, how to govern crypto, how to govern Web3, but there's also a really probably more important sort of conversation happening internally of how do we create norms, rules, structures, tools to govern within. And especially, I think there's a lot of, the word decentralized is used with Web3 very easily, very interchangeably. And it's funny because even in the Chinese political context, we have discussions about decentralized governance between the sort of center and provincial governments and how that works. And then within Web3, you have various states of decentralization and what that really means. And I think it's really useful to learn a little bit from each of your perspectives, actually working within Web3 of how decentralization actually plays out. And it would be great if we could hear from maybe Shawn or Jenks about how in your experience, decentralization really looks like within DAOs or within other spaces that you're a part of.
You want to go first, Shawn? Should I? Okay.
Okay.
So FileCoin, I'll go over a little bit about what FileCoin is about. So FileCoin is one of the largest decentralized storage network there. So people on the FileCoin network, they can bring their data center online to provide storage services, and people can consume these data centers. So it's playing the role of a centralized cloud services. So that's one of the most important function of the internet, meaning storing files. Everything we do on internet needs storage, and this is one of the fundamental thing that it requires. So to upgrade the internet to Web3 to a better future, you can't do it without infrastructure being decentralized as well. So there is a 3,900 miners, or we call them storage provider, because China banned mining. We changed the name from mining to storage provider on the protocol level. And then there are 3,900 miners plus miners around the world, distributed everywhere to provide storage. So there's the infrastructure decentralization, but also there is the governance, like ownership decentralization of these. Traditionally, cloud platforms are owned by single corporation, so single businesses. Even if it is public listed, it's still controlled. The stocks or the decision making still are controlled by a very small group of people. With blockchain project, you can distribute those decision making into community members based on either mining power or the number of participation, what kind of contribution they put into the project. So there's the way I see it, there's two parts to decentralization. One is physically, how does this machine work? How distributed geologically it is, and what parts these machines play. And then there's the people side or human side of it. So who contributes to what decision making in the system. So decentralization is a gradual process. I think a lot of projects understand that. So even though a lot of projects claims that they're very distributed, but at first they're going to be a little bit centralized, such as big mining leagues or alliance controlling mining powers, and they might together behave certain way, but that's okay. But it might be a process. I think all the projects who aims to go fully distributed, they will understand that that's a process. We need to go through this, and then as long as it's going to the direction of fully decentralization, then that's okay. So that's my view on how decentralization is developing in the blockchain space.
And thanks, Jenks. And I know since we have Kaitlin on as well, and Kaitlin works closely on governance, of course, within FileCoin, and especially on some of the forks or upgrades. So yeah, I would love to hear from Kaitlin on what decentralization looks like and her thoughts and views.
Yeah, thanks. I think Jenks gave a perfect introduction. I think he's completely correct from the point of view that we share. In terms of ensuring the decentralized ownership and decision-making of the FileCoin protocol, better incorporating Chinese community members in particular is probably one of the biggest hurdles that we have when it comes to actual processes of governance. I think there are a lot of reasons why this is. Cultural reasons, language is a big barrier, but I think it's important to recognize that one of the reasons why this is such a challenge is that the cultural assumptions go both ways between core teams, which are predominantly in North America and Europe, as well as predominantly storage providers in China. So there are a couple of characteristics that really stand out to me in working with Chinese community members on governance topics in particular. They tend to be significantly more professional, at least in terms of their organization or the way that they portray themselves as an entity in the network. Oftentimes we will be talking with individuals, but they will be very clear in representing their capacity, a company in their capacity, which is different from storage providers we see in North America and Europe. They tend to approach governance as being more of a business relationship rather than being this collaborative community effort. And they also tend to be more deeply involved in different facets of the ecosystem, even if their exposure and sort of ability to participate in governance appears to be lessened. So it is more common for us to have European storage providers or American storage providers, for example, who are very, very involved as storage providers in storage provider working groups, mentoring other storage providers, and maybe they also pay attention to governance. Whereas with Chinese storage providers and community members more broadly, what we see is that they tend to be much more involved in other companies working in other facets of the ecosystem. They tend to participate in and take advantage of other types of funding programs and mechanisms. But for us, it is also significantly more difficult to engage them on, again, those kind of decentralization aspects, community building, communications, governance, et cetera. I think I'll leave it there. I think we could dive into other things a little bit more deeply too, but I don't want to take up too much speaking time. And Jenks, feel free to correct me because you work with the Chinese community in a different focus than I do as a developer advocate.
Thanks, Kaitlin. Yeah, I think the Chinese aspect is fascinating, and I think we can get more into it also during the sort of audience Q&A, or even later on when we talk about the Chinese diaspora and how they engage. Shawn, maybe did you want to add anything towards your experience of how decentralization is playing out in the companies or the communities you're part of, especially SeeDAO, for instance, which is one of the largest DAOs connecting the Chinese diaspora?
Yeah, if we talk about fully decentralized, I think in the whole Web3 industry, less than 5% of DAO is fully decentralized. If you talk about the Chinese community, maybe none. All the DAO is still in the progressive decentralized, from the centralized to decentralized. I think there's different type. Some DAO is still no big difference with company. Actually, it's company, but with the name DAO. And I think roughly 80%. The DAO is from the centralized, maybe from the company. They still have the two different legal entity. One is company. For example, MirDAO. The core team, the company is in New York, in US. They have the 20 staff and they have the product development and this company working well. At the same time, they have the community, the MirDAO, and these two work together. Maybe they have the member, the shared member, they share the structure, but company and the DAO move together. They have their own plan. In 3 years, company will disappear, all return to DAO. I think that's the reality in the Web3 industry. All the DAO have their 3-5 years plan, how to move from the centralized to decentralized. And back to when we talk about SeeDAO, I think we have, my experience is, SeeDAO have more than 10,000 members, but almost all the members come to DAO. They have no interest in for governance. They come here to share ideas, to build the project together, or they want to do something interesting and have fun. Just, I think, no more than 100 members, the active members, they're looking for, yeah, we want to do the governance because it's something really interesting and it's future and something they improve the governance. But it's not, I think, yeah, less than 5% in the SeeDAO, less than 5% interesting for governance. And the second thing I notice is the cost for governance is very higher compared to a company. I think the cost is too higher. I mentioned the mission of the SeeDAO is to connect 1 million digital nomads. Okay, just the 10,000 members, the cost we can't afford. How about 1 million? So that's why we slow down. We have to do something. How to reduce the cost, governance cost, how to increase the efficiency, to make us ready for the big network for global digital nomad. So I think the whole industry is working hard in this stage. That's my, my experience. Thanks.
Thanks, Shawn. If I can just ask you to maybe elaborate a little bit on what you mean by cost of governance and why in more members it makes it more expensive.
For example, proposal. In the whole community, how many people can write a proposal? Awesome proposal? No. I think just a couple of people can write a proposal. That's why you have to pay money. You have to have a team to write a proposal for whole community. And second thing, you have to do education. The people, how to understand decentralized, how to understand to do the governance, why we need to do the governance. Education cost is higher. And another thing is, you will find when we talk about the voting, talk about governance, but when we release the proposal, you'll find in the whole community only 20, 30 members will come to vote. How to make the community active and make it understand the importance, how to do the vote. I think all this is the cost. You need a team. So in this stage, the cost is a little bit higher than my imagination before.
Thanks, Shawn. That's really fascinating. And I think these are some of the costs that I think people looking from the outside, it's really hard to see, and it was really nice to get that insider take. And And perhaps there's also costs that come in from, you mentioned how many DAOs are still operating as companies. And I wonder how much of a challenge is that the larger legal systems perhaps today don't have a strong recognition for DAOs, and whether that also makes it more challenging. And perhaps also the lack of tools. I don't know, for instance, MetaGov is working on, some of the teams there working on actually creating tools. And perhaps, Ellie, if maybe you wanted to add a little bit on how these tools or the lack of tools can sometimes impact how decentralized Web3 can really be.
Yeah, thanks. Really interesting comments. Thank you. I mean, I think it's important to recognize that DAOs are automated decision-making tools for governance, and they are aiming for the kinds of efficiency that you're talking about. They do descend often into because I think how early in this we are, we kind of end up with these laborious deliberative democracy processes in DAOs that people just get fatigued and leave, or those who are better at writing proposals kind of have more power in the system, or whatever it might be, kind of things that political scholars have known for some time. We just kind of see this playing out in DAOs. And I think that the reason why people are persisting with them and working on them is that the promise of DAOs. I mean, I describe the smart contracts of DAOs, the machine actors within DAOs, as the bureaucrat that is supposed to be doing the work for the political principles, which is the decision makers and the members and all the rest of it. And we haven't necessarily got it right in terms of the extent to which those smart contracts or processes that are automated can be responsive to what that community needs or expects or wants, or to enable that community to steer whatever it is that DAO is governing. In the case of FileCoin, that's a massive infrastructure for data centers, and now the FileCoin virtual machine and the rest of it, upon which smart contracts can be built for all kinds of new capabilities as well. So, I mean, I suppose to try and tie it back to some of the themes of this conference, then, I was talking earlier to a couple of people about, Haimin G's concept of institutional layering from day one of this conference, and this idea that we have, that autocrats like ADMs, because they mean that we don't have to maintain or put any additional power into judiciaries or institutions. And actually, I think, Web3 is that promise as well. It's just that it's not doing it for autocrats. It's more for these communities or groups, or, in the case of FileCoin, infrastructure providers, ways to for them to be able to have the capabilities of institutions, or to not have to rely on institutions, to just be able to do things that are needed. I mean, Haimin was talking far more about the I suppose, questions around punishment, or things that we see coming through the social credit system, whereas in this case, it's just that we're making things work in the background and alleviating all our reliance on external systems of either the state or whatever it might be. And that's what Web3 is doing. So Web3, I mean, just taking it back to the earlier, at the start of this conversation, I don't think it's incompatible with China itself. And in fact, the way that China has progressed with CBDCs, central bank digital currency, faster than anyone else, the BSN, the blockchain services network that China did very early. And yes, they talk about blockchain, not Web3, and not DAOs, and not all the things that we think of in terms of permissionless decentralized systems. But it's it's just, you know, it's still not that far removed, I think, from China at all. It's just that question of who and where that power is. And I don't think DAOs are necessarily going to be this kind of perfect democracy thing that people currently talk about them as. It's actually more corporate governance that they're trying to perfect. It's about constraining, you know, bad actors within a system, insiders and the rest of it, as opposed to, you know, trying to create some kind of political power. So I think that, like, we often overstate what DAOs are, and in fact, if we start thinking of them as automated decision-making machines alongside all these other ones, there's probably less of a chasm between what's going on in China and what's going on in Web3. Sorry, a bit of a rant, but that's my just synthesis of some of the conversation that's been going on here.
Thanks, Ellie. I think we could have a separate workshop on that particular angle itself. Kaitlin, I know you maybe had a point and a question to make.
Yeah, if you had a separate workshop on that, I'd go to that one too. I think to tie Ellie's comments too back to what I think it was Shawn who said in the beginning, that there almost seems to be two different Web3s. There's the Web3 in China, and then there is the Web3 happening within the Chinese diaspora outside of China. But I wonder within China, there also, it seems like there are different participants of Web3 as well. Those participating in Chinese native Web3 projects, regardless of how they're defined, right? Many are probably self-defined that way. And also Chinese companies and individuals that are participating in Web3 projects that may have originated or be predominantly based in other parts of the world. And I wonder for the panel, whether your experiences with protocols or DAOs or even investment opportunities in China, do you see, I guess on the governance front, any diffusion between those two separate groups? Are there any kind of cultural exchanges or learnings happening between perhaps, you know, Chinese folks participating in the Ethereum ecosystem in a variety of different ways, or even smaller external non-Chinese projects, and folks who are trying to originate these Chinese Web3 projects? I assume they are participating under the Web3 banner in different sort of social media channels, et cetera, but do you actually see there being this cross-pollination or no? I hope that makes sense.
Who would like to answer this question?
Well, I actually work in China for my whole journey working in Web3, but I would say the diffusion is like very slim for Chinese version of Web3 projects and project that's just based in China, but marketing to the rest of the world. One of the reasons is the tech infrastructure is so different. So you can't write a set of code for projects on public chain, and then you transfer it into Chinese version of Web3. That's very, very challenging. That's basically scraping like the whole project and basically like redo one. And another one is the mindset. So like when I got into the industry, it was like mid-2020. And then the predominant group of Chinese working in Web3 at the time is more for let's have a revolutionary set of projects that help us break the current norm of value system or whatever. It was that sort of like crypto propaganda that get us into the trend of project at the time. But for Chinese Web3 project, they don't follow that. They're more like that's just because there are articles saying that, or there are reports saying that this is the next set next infrastructure. This is the infrastructure for the next generation of web. So let's take over that that new land basically first, so that we have this like dominating player effect when later like Chinese really adopting this industry in large scale. So that's two very different mindsets, and that led to like two very different directions of projects later as it developed further.
Well, Dave, can I just throw in one question for James and then for Nicholas to make a comment? You know, talking about the Kaitlin talked about the different the Chinese being factional and the difficulty of engaging Chinese in governance. But then previously, people also talk about the Chinese using VPN to scale the wall to join the Western or the international public info networks, and also go overseas physically or move their machines overseas for crypto mining, etc. And you, James, you mentioned, you know, you deal with people in China and overseas in Chinese, of course, on WeChat, on Chinese platform quite often. So do you feel that any friction or how do you view this kind of interaction between people inside the wall and people outside the wall?
I think the definition of Web3, as far as my understanding, is about the ownership. Because we are talking about the NFT or other like token or USDC or whatever. It's about the ownership. If say I have an NFT. I have a picture. It's like storage in the in IPFS or whatever. No one can take that. That's the ownership as far as I know. But and the people in China, they like especially the speculators, they don't care about the ownership. They just want to like make money without the without like convincing the ownership. But my understanding is the ownership itself is more important than the rest of things. So that's why I my participating on like BAYC, because they the narrative of the BAYC is like, if I own the NFT itself, I own the IP. I can do whatever like derivative, or I can put the monkey picture on my t-shirt, so I own that. Like say, if it is in the like Web2 world, say if I like have put the Disney Mickey Mouse on my t-shirt, I will be sued by Disney because I I'm not allowed to do that without like
Copyright.
Yeah, copyright. That's yeah. That's what I my understanding of the people understanding of the Web3 in China and the rest of the world.
Yeah, I think that point about ownership, I mean, yes, Web3 is the internet of value. The thing is, you can only have that value, that ownership that you're describing, if you have confidence, you know, the confidence machine, as Primavera de Filippi and her colleagues talk about it. You can only have that when you have a knowledge of a system that is going to work, where no one can take that away from you, whether that's the state or, you know, in the case of Meta's metaverse, that they could, or a typical, you know, game, that they can just take your asset away from you. So, I mean, there is that fundamental need for the system to be sufficiently decentralized for us to have confidence that we can have ownership and that we can have that ability to transfer that to whomever we wish to transfer it. So I think that's where that fundamental disconnect is between, say, the China approach to blockchain, not as in a centralized private blockchain system, is who is actually going to have confidence in that. But at the same time, you see the adoption on something like Binance Smart Chain, which is actually, you know, kind of controlled and it's quite centralized, kind of shows that most people don't really care necessarily about whether that asset is theirs. And I think like the work FileCoin is doing is super interesting in regards to ownership, because, you know, the NFT storage, which is in the FileCoin NFT.storage, which is part of the FileCoin suite, where you can, you actually know that your NFT is going to be stored in this decentralized system, and not the URL won't just disappear and all the rest of it. You know, so it's actually, the file will be there and you can have confidence in that. Yeah, right. NFT.storage on the cap. Yeah. So like so for me, it's almost like there's still all of this makes sense, right? That's how this system works, and it only works if we have that confidence. And yet large parts of the world don't care, and the traders don't care. So I suppose my question is, I mean, it sounds like in China, to what extent do people care? Because I think, say, the Binance Smart Chain is quite popular among Chinese people, right? Correct. So, okay, news item today, Justin's son is moving to Hong Kong. So quite infamous figure in the blockchain world, Tron blockchain, who has, you know, kind of actually, you know, done some quite startling moves by buying whole other systems because he had enough tokens to be able to do that. Like he's kind of an icon of centralization inside blockchain world, correct? So I mean, yeah. So my question is, like, is there a separation between that concept of decentralization and having confidence in ownership, or is it more just speculation?
While you guys take 1 second to think about it, talking about ownership, I'd like to throw a question to Nicholas as well. You know, it looks like the Chinese participation or involvement in Web3 products is mainly about ownership, whether it's material ownership, machines, or symbolic ownership, NFTs, right? So yeah, while you guys can answer this question, I also want to throw the question to Nicholas based on his initial research about the Chinese involvement, overseas Chinese involvement mostly, right? In the crypto mining, the ownership of that part.
Well, I mean, I think this is a really interesting, I mean, this is one of the things that drew me to this in the first place. And I mean, when we're talking about Web3, I think you just start throwing terms around. It's such a diverse space, right? I mean, we're actually talking about completely different things here. I mean, this is just like a tiny little sliver of what's going on out there. I mean, you've got all different types of organizations, different types of setups, experimentation, but then you also have completely different aspects of it, right? So you have the production of crypto mining machines, for instance, right? Which is primarily owned by Chinese entities, right? I mean, the vast majority of crypto miners are produced by Chinese companies. I mean, you've got Binance, right? And which is the largest trading platform at the moment, right? And you just, there's China everywhere in Web3, right? Even though I think the main discourses of it are about crackdowns in China or this or that. So I mean, I just think it's really fascinating to think about the different types of ownership. If we're talking about material, we're talking about virtual, we're talking about ownership of ideas and kind of conceptual ownership within the whole space, and you know these leading figures who are there and are seen as kind of thought leaders within the space of Web3. But yeah, I guess you've got your question for them as well, and I would just kind of tack on to that. I think, something that strikes me is the kind of optimism that is inherent to the whole Web3 and crypto space. It's almost like you've got to be optimistic, right? You have to bring some sort of optimistic energy into this to further the development going forward. But then you also have this experience with the Chinese side of things, where there are all these crackdowns and instability, and so how do you navigate the great uncertainties? And I mean, it's not even just the Chinese side. I mean, crypto and Web3 is in turmoil all over the world, right? So how do you navigate between these worlds and continue to push forward your products and your projects within these kind of turbulent times across China and the rest of the world?
I think we're all going to learn how to be optimistic in this bear market. It looks like it's going to be a while. So I'll go back to Ellie's point on decentralization and do people care about this?
Yeah.
I mean, people didn't care about cloud platforms before. If you tell them like the data is hosted by the company and on cloud 20 years ago, people never cared about it. But now everybody's talking about cloud because it's a more efficient way of doing things. It unlocks a lot of possibilities. And now we're talking about decentralized infrastructure for the internet. So FileCoin is essentially breaking down that kind of centralization and then making a smaller business can own a piece of internet, basically. So that's like an incredible concept. Will people care? That's the question. Will people pay for the attribute of decentralization? If it is exactly the same product, like NFT storage and Dropbox is quite similar, right? But will people put it on NFT storage? I should say Web3 storage is the paid product. NFT storage is more of a public good for the NFT industry. Will people pay for that? That's a big challenge right now. I wouldn't sort of sugarcoat it. It's hard to sell people decentralization. Even if you reduce the price for decentralized technology, which FileCoin does, our storage solution is a lot cheaper. In many cases, we subsidize it, and it's like almost negatively priced. So we're trying to encourage data onboarding. A lot of people still don't want to come over. But I think what people need to understand, or what will trigger the migration to decentralized technology, is that they need well and truly the decentralization aspect of it. So for FileCoin, it's the possibility of replicating your data in thousands of nodes rather than just one or two on cloud platforms. It's the attribute of being able to sustain data for longer than single corporation. A company might fall over 100 years, but economy wouldn't fall can last for over 100 years. So if you run a successful economy of data centers that is doing business in this kind of system, ecosystem that kind of have people coming in, leaving, you might have data stored for longer, and so permanent storage might be a possibility in the future. So unless we can convince people that decentralization is different, and then people need that difference, they won't. It's hard to justify the kind of value for the decentralization of the technology. So on Kaitlyn's point, is there a separation between the Chinese blockchain technology community and then the kind of the Web3 or Western, or I should say the rest of the world Web3 community? I think there is. I've never spoken to anyone working on like CNY project, EUN project. The only connection I had was a company that did the trial for the Chinese government of the blockchain system, and that was it. And they were working on like other Web3 projects ever since. So it's getting bigger and bigger. Last time I was in Singapore attending a conference called Token 2049. We also did a conference there, Phil Singapore conference. That was a good way to get in touch with the miners that's in the process of migrating their machines or their operation outside of China. I met about 5 or 6, 7 even either mining or Web3 projects that are in the process of migrating. We're moving our offices and all of our stuff to Singapore or Hong Kong. Hong Kong wasn't like allowed at the time still, like people were onshore. So primarily it was moving to Singapore, North America, or Thailand or Korea. There is a big kind of, the separation is getting bigger, is what I wanted to say.
Yes, and I talked with my friend, last year about the ownership. I think a lot of people don't care, but 3 months ago, the biggest digital collection platform in China shut down, closed. I think it's not an NFT, it's just a digital collection, and people lost all the digital asset. It's in the decentralized platform. And then again, we talk about this issue. You really understand what's going on, why we need to put NFT in a blockchain, and we have the fully ownership of this digital asset in a blockchain, and this is the most important for that. I think people will learn a lesson from the I think the reality.
Thanks, Shawn. In the interest of time, I want to do a quick round sort of question with each of the 4 panelists before moving to the audience Q&A. And I'm going to situate the conversation back or sort of segue it nicely to the Chinese diaspora and, within Web3. I think when we look at Web2, for instance, there's a lot of literature looking at how sort of the role that the United States played in the growth of, Chinese tech sector, both in terms of flow of talent, of ideas. You had several of the, entrepreneurs, whether it's Mahatang from Tencent or others who studied in the US and then moved back to China. I was wondering if each of the speakers could just take a minute each to just share your view, both as members of the Chinese diaspora living in Australia, the kind of connections between the Australian ecosystem and sort of the Chinese Web3 or the mainland Chinese Web3 ecosystem, and what kind of flows of capital, of ideas, and culture sort of flow in. And if you could just spend like a minute each, and then we'll move to the audience Q&A. And maybe who wants to kick off? I'll put the mic on Casey first.
Well, I actually just moved to Australia 4 months ago. And what I've noticed is that a lot of the Web3 people I met online, who also have Chinese heritage, even though we never mentioned that they are based in Australia. And then after I announced I'm moving to Australia, a lot of them reach out saying that I'm based in Australia. And that actually got me question that why so many Web3 people with Chinese heritage are based in Australia. And of course, like we can go back to like a lot of their parents or they themselves like invest in Australia, even like in Web2 era or like even before that, because because the location of Australia is like close enough to Asia, but at the same time very westernized, so that they can live a Western style lifestyle. But at the same time, as we mentioned, like as Chinese, like cracking down anything related to token, a lot of us who have projects that originated in China want to like move away from China and find a home for the projects. And before Hong Kong announced their new policy, Singapore was the first choice, and then American, but as America has a pretty strong regulation on Web3 project as well. Their second choice is actually moving to Australia at this time. So we can see like another flow of like Chinese money and Chinese talents from Web3 injecting into Australia without really announcing it, because like at this time it's a lot of anonymous like value flows going on. And at the same time, I would say investment into like Chinese projects is very uncertain. They are interested in Chinese founder, but investor would suggest the founders move to somewhere else before they launch their assets. Either is no matter is a token or NFT. So they would suggest that to avoid the uncertainty of losing their investments to Chinese founders.
James, do you have any experience to share about the kind of two ecosystems? One is within China and the other in Australia, and the flow of talent, capital, assets between these two worlds?
Can I respond later? Or
yes, yes,
after?
of course.
Yeah,
yes, sure. We have a bit time for a Q&A from the floor. Oh, great. All right, we go to there. Can we get the microphone, please? Warwick, yes. Please.
Great, fantastic panel, guys. Like you, I've spent the best part of the last 5 or 6 years working across borders in whatever we call it, and perhaps trying to give something a name also doesn't do its service. So the idea of Web3 can mean many different things to different people and in different places. And in fact, it's the differences that we're trying to understand as much as the similarities. I've actually got 4 comments to make very briefly. The first one goes to the question of DAOs as automated decision mechanisms. And I'd suggest that that is possibly one aspect of it, but the A is actually autonomous as opposed to automated. And it doesn't necessarily mean leaving it to the machine in every instance. We can, of course, use smart contracts that way, but not all DAOs are imagined as ways of devolving human beings from responsibility. So that's probably the first observation I'll make, is that autonomy should not be conflated with automated. The second thing, and this goes to the difference between the Chinese and the external diaspora and the designs, I guess, or the parameters of blockchains, is the Western blockchain ethos came out of a very particular solution to a very particular set of problems, which was this problem of emulating cash in a digital sense without a central trusted authority. And to do that, it placed 2 very deliberate constraints. One was that the network had to be permissionless, and the second one was that it had to be effectively anonymous. But distributed information systems don't need those 2 presuppositions. So that's my second observation, and that drives the big difference. The third one is this idea of the consensus mechanism and tokens. And we all know that blockchains with tokens are not legal in China, though interestingly enough, ownership of tokens is perfectly fine. And my last comment is, and I love this energy around DAOs, right? Because this is human beings trying to figure out ways of creating and running self-organizing communities. And there is a little bit of an what is old is new in all of this. And I'd suggest that you guys who are thinking and doing stuff in DAOs go back into the history of associations, guilds, mutuals, and cooperatives to find the legal and organizational protocols that have been worked on through centuries that, in fact, I think will help you guys in turning those visions into technical tools. So more of a comment than anything else, but I just love the energy and the optimism.
I'm not as knowledgeable about this topic like Warwick, but I have to say thank the panel for a great sharing. I just want to ask a clarification question about 电子人民币, right? The Chinese yuan. So if we say there are 2 parts of Web3, one is outside China, the other one is within China, but trying to evade the government. What about this e-currency issued, by the People's Bank of China, trying to allegedly trying to compete with Bitcoin and stable coins of the world? And it seems to me that the adoption rate is really low within China, even though the government supposedly, is should be having the ultimate power, but seem they don't have the power to push this to. Am I correct? And will that, if there's a failure of Chinese yuan, will that create more opportunities in the future, either for Beijing to flip its position like zero COVID, all right, or create other opportunities for the diaspora?
Well, thanks, Jenks, for your question, and Warwick for your comments. Concerning the central bank digital currency, Ellie, you mentioned it already, that China actually is leading in the world in developing this. Do you have more to say so we can understand a bit more?
I mean, I don't know much about the adoption question and why that's been so limited. I think there are interesting questions around the interoperability of different nations' central bank digital currencies. And there's been a number of pilots through the Bank for International Settlements and other entities around, like, so you can create an E1 or whatever it might be, or a $do, I think was the name we were jokingly referring to an Australian stablecoin. Or CBDC, but there are kind of questions there around surveillance and privacy, which comes back to Mark's work, but and the extent to which, once you allow these financial infrastructures with those automation capabilities that are controlled by the state, you need to put a lot of limits on them before you could have them, being trusted by another state. So it's not just the kind of privacy and surveillance issues for individuals that I'm interested in, but also what it's going to do at this kind of global monetary system level and the implications for privacy policy. I think there's some big questions there. It could enhance privacy because they're simply not going to be able to have these things unless there are international agreements around what states can and can't do with these technologies in other states. As soon as you put something into that context of finance systems and money and the economy, maybe privacy also gets elevated to something beyond individual concerns, but that's an optimistic view. It's probably going to go the other way. So yeah, I don't know. Does anyone have any thoughts on adoption of the E1?
I have a question. I heard of e-yuan trials with a few countries, and when people say like China has advanced more in ODBC, I think it's in the sense that it trialed with many other countries than any.
Particularly along the Silk Road,
right?
Belt and Road Initiative.
Probably in terms of influence, it has reached, whereas US, Canada, or these companies, these countries haven't gotten that far yet.
But for instance, the American government would let its Olympic athletes use the E1, and so there's been kind of also a whole lot of kind of resistance to it, and now these international agreements forming. So I suspect it's just that they're figuring out how to work it, and I think it's going to happen, and I think it's probably absolutely going to be a threat to stable coins or other systems, and what's happened with FTX is just more ammunition for it.
Can I just say something? Because I delved a little bit down the rabbit hole into the national currencies. And I mean, this is a whole different animal than the whole rest of Web3, actually. It's like, I mean, it's almost a completely different thing, I would say. But something I've never understood about it, and someone here who has some thoughts on this can talk to me after this. I mean, we know how money works. I mean, money is not just created by the government, right? I mean, money is created in different ways. Money is created by banks through lending as well, right? So how does that work if you have a national e-currency like that? I think there are really big questions that I have.
There's a number of models out there that various countries are experimenting with, but even the UK was advocating that it be kind of outsourced to the private banking system in the same way that other money is. So I don't think it'll be that different, but it's more that it's issued by the government.
But it's almost like, a big part of how monetary systems work, as far as I'm concerned, is through a kind of strategic ambiguity, right? Like you don't actually want to know how much money is being issued into the system because it's like a dirty little secret, right? So if it is all tracked on a blockchain, then what does it do to economies? I think it's a really...
I think that question deserves a separate session.
Yeah, I think so too.
Right, for us to all to have a go. Because the EIB or the central bank digital currency topic is one example of how the Chinese government selectively use blockchain technologies for its own geopolitical purposes, right? So, but today, we have focused on Web3 specific products, governance, and particularly the impact and the influence among the Chinese digital diasporas. I was going to ask them to reflect on their role within the community and whether they view their shared ideologies or value systems within the groups, even among the Chinese community that make up, the Web3 Chinese digital diaspora. But I think you have all touched upon this, and refer back to Warwick's comment. Some of you raised the 4 points. Some of them are universal, but some can be catered or tailored to the Chinese community, and then you have different discourse. And I refer to Kaitlyn's earlier comment again about the difficulties to engage with Chinese members within the community and how the Chinese communities can be quite fractional. And what happens in the brand new world actually reflects what has happened long ago, currently, offline, in the real world. So I just want to throw the floor to all 4 panelists for the very final comments, and then we can just wind it up. Shawn, would you go ahead? We respect the oldest one.
Sorry for
Okay, to show respect, we let the eldest one to be the last. How about that?
the last. Yeah.
Yes, to wrap up. But that will be the one to wrap up on behalf of me and all of us. But Jenks, so you're the young one.
Do I go first?
Yes, please.
Okay, cool. My role in the community, I think for my project, Kaitlyn mentioned the difficulties between sort of Chinese background participants and the rest. My role, I think, is to bridge communication, right? So there's communication problem with our governance program. We also have a public good program called FileCoin+. A lot of people didn't understand it. A lot of people couldn't participate it from the Chinese community because they didn't understand the documentation, or they didn't know how it worked, or didn't have access to certain communication that we are putting out because it's primarily in English. I'm bridging a lot more of those. So there are a lot of things that I can sort of understand from looking at documentation and chats in and most recent events that we hold on some parts of the world. I'm trying to bring those news to the Chinese community. And when I speak to someone who doesn't understand this industry, I'm doing my best to use my language skill to explain that. Also the concept of it, right? Explaining my job to my parents has been a challenge, but they get it kind of now, and they're in support. They're supportive of my career path in this area.
I see.
Yeah, my role in the community is make the A work, as the guest mentioned, the DAO. When we try to define the DAO autonomous in the first version Ethereum white paper, he defined the DAO and he mentioned the difference between DAO and the DO. But I think after 7 years, the industry, crypto industry, like sometimes A doesn't work. So in the latest version white paper, Vitalik remove the difference between DAO and the DO. He removed this one. For almost all the DAO, actually a little bit the same with DO. And my role in the communities, we try to make A work. That's why we build the DAO tool. We build the DAO infrastructure. Autonomous need the DAO tool to do support. In this stage, I think not just in the Chinese community, in the global, we have found lots of DAOs, Bankless DAO, C Club, FWB, other DAOs in the English community. They don't have enough tool to support autonomous. So they still need the offline negotiation, even offline meeting to make the decision. So I think I really interesting, and my role is to build the tool to support autonomous. Yeah, that's it.
So last year when I was still in a team of running SeeDAO, my role was to, because my background was product manager. So I basically like implementing the existing DAO tools into the, not like DAO tools, but like the infrastructure that can support a DAO runs itself. And then by the latter part, it's more like connecting SeeDAO with other projects or other community and see like how they can work together and create a bigger flow of talents and of values. And for my current work, as I work for VC, because my unique edge comparing to other analysts is that I'm deep in the Chinese Web3 community, so that I probably report back what's happening inside Chinese Web3 and then notify some different trends comparing to the Western, well, at least like the Web3 trend here. So that's my current role in Web3.
Despite there are many like short-term trader or speculator, I think the Web3 is still how to put it, more and more people get to know Web3, and after the bull market now after the bubble being popped, everyone's getting calmed, and I ask myself, and would like to just create real value instead of like pump and dump, just like doing nothing valuable. And I think for my personal view, I will do more study and create like real value into the Web3. Yeah.
I'll just add one word because I had a chat with James about this idea before, and he's told me a lot, and a lot about what he has learned through the whole experience, being the investor, being the observer, and participant in the Web3 products. And he said what he has learned is, one is initially the synthesization of identity. Casey, you mentioned the same. When you're communicating with the international community on on the platforms, and you didn't know, you would not declare who you are or your nationality. But then then you come to the second stage, then you re-identify yourself as Chinese and use that as a wedge into the next stage of your career or your investment career, right? So the kind of de-Sinicization of the Chineseness and the reconnection with the Chineseness is part of the process of being involved in this Web3 community. And James also mentioned about the ideal of democracy and the ideal of participation, democratic participation in the DAO management, in the DAO community is another lesson that he has learned as a kind of a re-education process for people from mainland China who has not had the opportunity of getting the citizenship education. So this is being in Australia, being part of the international DAO community has been an educational process for the Chinese digital diaspora, particularly for the first generation migrants. Am I right?
Yeah. That's what I forgot to mention. Yeah. It's about the voting and the like democracy, because I raised in China. I have no idea what the vote is. Even though I got a citizenship in Australia after I think 5 years before. I know I have the right to vote, but to be honest, I have no idea who I'm voting for. Yeah, that has a joke. Is my first voting party is sex party, because at that time I just found that was fun. Yeah, but
now you are taking more seriously.
Definitely
with your voting rights.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, after the participate the DAO voting and the proposal, I had to I study like what is left, what is right, what the party do. Yes, to meet my own rights. Yeah, that's what I learned from the Web3 and DAO and voting. Yeah.
All right, over to you, Dave.
Thank you. Haiqing, that was already an excellent wrap up, and it's tough to follow that and stitch together so many of the themes and points that 4 wonderful speakers and 3 discussants have brought up. And I know it's been a long conference starting on Wednesday, and all of you are keen, I'm sure, get the cocktails and to just let your hair down a little bit. So I'll be very quick. I think it's notable that we've had this panel on Web3 at the end of 3 days of talking about ADM+S and China and Web2. And I think so many of the themes that have come up in today's discussion, whether it's what is the Chinese Web3 even look like, who are the communities that take part of it, what are the systems, and what does tokenless and versus token metaverse look like. I think we, possibly in future years, Haiqing, we're going to have to do a sort of a larger conference that will have more and more Web3 eating up Web2, which is perhaps what we're seeing outside as well. I think some of the point that I'll make is how early we are in this game, and both in terms of Web3 from a larger macro context. I think looking at things like adoption figures, probably somewhere in the early 90s of the internet, maybe creeping up now to the mid 90s. And so much of the conversations around what is the DAO, what will look like, is DAO and an automated decision-making system or not. I think all of these questions will be sort of discussed and as the technology and products itself evolve. And I think Shawn mentioned about how you have 2 Web3s. You have the China Web3 and you have the sort of rest of the world Web3. And in so many ways, I feel like that reflects just the same transitions we went with with Web2, right? Where we had we've had this Chinese internet and we've had this global internet, and now you have other countries who are also creating their own versions of the internet. And so perhaps we're going to see, we've seen a Chinese Web3, we're going to see other Web3s also emerge. And so I think this is why it makes it really important that we, study and examine what's happening in the mainland, because, so many other, so many other regions will be looking at, China's own experience creating this sort of CBDC, creating tokenless metaverse. I know, for instance, the Indian government has also released its own blockchain policy papers where they've also sort of said, we don't like Bitcoin, we don't like tokens, but we like blockchain and we like centralization. And so this sort of, what does a centralized blockchain ecosystem look like? I think some of these answers will certainly come out from the mainland. And I think it's and it's clear that we really need to spend a lot more resources and time sort of having this discourse and dialogue. And I think that's why it's really great that we've had Shawn, Casey, Jenks, and James be these bridges, because I think in the previous, if you look back, the last 10 or 20 years, where the internet really coming out from the United States, and then sort of slowly filtering out into the rest of the world. Whereas now we're sort of sitting at a different point of time where we're even having this conversation about, is China leading in certain areas of technology? And so I think, there's a lot more equality and openness, both in terms of ideas and people moving in and out. And so looking at how, the Chinese diaspora plays a role in building out the Web3 ecosystem, not necessarily even under, necessarily as a Chinese Web3, network or a platform, but really just as, the Chinese diaspora going around and building products and tools that end up then solving problems for people around the world. And I think it's going to be really fascinating to see how this Web3 ecosystem grows and the role that the Chinese diaspora will play. And I think the final point I'll land on is, this question of frictions. We've got within Web3, you've got I think Kaitlin mentioned the machine side and the human side. And perhaps it's the human side that will sort of continue to have sort of issues, questions raised. How do we bring in values of openness, of democracy, of interoperability, fairness, all of these values that, ultimately are human problems rather than machine problems, and how do we bring that into the Web3 ecosystem? And then in addition to all the sort of state frictions, whether it's through regulations, whether it's, nation states sort of co-opting and coercing communities. I think for so long, I think within Web3, within crypto, China banning Bitcoin was a meme almost, right? Every time there was a drop, every time, China banned Bitcoin, I don't know how many times over a 10-year period, until eventually in 2021, we probably saw the most real ban. But even then, I think looking at some of the data points around, miners moving back, using VPNs to obscure identity, and of course, like central versus local government in China, governments in China, and how they are maybe allowing some gray room for miners and others in the community to still operate. So I think this story of within Web2, when we talk about censorship and how censorship in China has always been, from the state, has always been pushing boundaries, and so too that's kind of created that cat and mouse response where Chinese internet users have been the most creative and sophisticated in their ways of evading censorship. And so I think likewise within Web3, where we also see the same cat and mouse game appear globally, with various nation states coming out with their own sort of controls and policies. And it's going to be how the Web3 community responds and whether they stick to the same ethos and values. And so I think here, looking at lessons from the China experience here, I think can be very notable. So I think with that, I will give the floor back to you, Haiqing, and thank you all for joining. And it's been a pleasure to listen from afar over the last few days. And I'm sure you're going to enjoy the rest of the evening in Melbourne. So thank you.
Dave, thank you very much for this wonderful summary. I know, when I ask you to do this, I know you would do a fantastic job, really. You said what I would need to say, and I don't have to say much. Apart from thank you all for panelists, and thank you all three, including the one online, Kaitlin, of three discussants, for your wonderful contribution to this first ever industry panel on Web3 and the Chinese digital diaspora. I hope that we can continue this conversation over dinner and in the future. And thank you all, audience, for being with us, being with me, being with all of us for the last 3 days at the International Conference on Automated Decision-Making and the Chinese Societies. And I finally can say that we have successfully sailed through the 3 days, 3 full days, and I hope you have enjoyed the conference. And I look forward to seeing you again very soon in the future events and future conversations, whether online or in person. Thank you all.